The glass hit the table so hard it shattered into 3 pieces, and every conversation in that ballroom died in the same second. Wait, because what John Wayne did in the 12 seconds after Frank Sinatra threw that challenge across the table wasn't about tonight at all. It was about settling a score from a Vegas hotel hallway 21 months ago, and almost nobody in that room knew they were watching round 2. March 1968. The Regency Hotel Ballroom. 200 of Hollywood's finest in black tie and evening gowns, crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the kind of night where everyone smiled for cameras and saved real opinions for the parking lot. John Wayne sat at table 7 with his back to the wall. Frank Sinatra was 3 chairs down, close enough that polite conversation was mandatory, far enough that they didn't have to look at each other. But here's what nobody knew. Frank had spent 21 months carrying something heavy. June 1966. The Sands Hotel. 3 in the morning. John Wayne knocking on his door, stepping over his bodyguard, Tony, walking into his suite uninvited, and shutting down Frank's party with nothing but a stare. The story spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Everyone loved it. The Duke handling business the old-fashioned way, showing Frank Sinatra what real authority looked like. Nobody asked Frank how it felt to be treated like a misbehaving child in front of his own guests. The story became legend, and Frank became the punchline. Tonight was supposed to be different. The studio wanted both men for a Western called Desert Justice. Big budget, big names. The contracts weren't signed yet. The night was supposed to smooth things over before the lawyers finished paperwork. That plan lasted about 45 minutes. The first crack came when someone made a joke about method actors and their feelings. John laughed, that low rumble of agreement. Frank didn't laugh. He set his drink down harder than necessary and said something about how some people confuse showing up with actual talent. The edge was unmistakable. A woman in silver tried to redirect toward the food, but the damage was done. What she didn't know was that Frank had just flashed back to Vegas, to standing at his piano while Wayne walked through his door, uninvited, to his guests' faces, to the silence after Wayne left. Frank had replayed that night 1,000 times in 21 months, and every time it ended with him looking weak, controlled, like someone who needed John Wayne to put him in his place. Tonight, sitting 3 chairs away, Frank felt that old anger rise up like bile. Look, John didn't start fights, but he finished them. He'd built his career on being the steady one, the professional. But he had a line you didn't cross, and that line had everything to do with respect. When someone questioned his craft in public, even sideways, his jaw would set just slightly. His right hand would grip his glass tighter, and his eyes would lock on to whoever said it with the kind of attention that made grown men wish they'd kept quiet. Frank saw that look and met it head on. He wasn't built to back down any more than John was. He leaned into conflict, used it as fuel. So when John's stare landed on him, Frank didn't look away. He smiled, barely, and raised his glass like he was toasting something private. The next 20 minutes played out in careful silence while the rest of the ballroom carried on with dessert. John cut his steak with precision. Frank lit a cigarette, took his time. The other 6 people at the table tried to pretend nothing was happening, but their shoulders were tight. Around 9:30, the studio head Victor Chen stood at the main table to give a toast. Golden age of cinema, working with legends, bold and brave, standard speech. But then he added a line about how real artistry required both discipline and heart. He looked directly at table 7 when he said it. Frank's fingers tightened around his glass. Discipline. That's what everyone called it after Vegas. Wayne showed real discipline. That's how a professional handles it. Frank had heard it 100 times, always with that implication that he didn't have discipline, that he needed to be tamed. And here was Victor, saying it again, in front of 200 people. That's when Frank leaned forward, looked past the centerpiece at John, and said loud enough for their table to hear, You know what your problem is, Duke? You think showing up is the same as showing depth. Notice how that lands like a verdict. John didn't respond immediately. He finished chewing, set his fork down parallel to his knife, wiped his mouth. 3 deliberate gestures. The woman in silver touched Frank's arm, said something like, "Oh, come on. Not tonight." But Frank shook his head sharp, and she pulled back. John leaned back just an inch. Funny thing about depth, Frank. It's real easy to confuse it with drama. The table went still. Frank's smile disappeared. His hand went to his glass, not to drink, but to hold it, weighing it. Remember this moment, because when we come back to it, you won't see it the same way. 2 days before the gala, Frank had met with Victor Chen and 2 executives. They'd told him the Wayne picture was his if he wanted it, but he needed to play nice. Frank had nodded, said all the right things, but walking out, he'd told his manager, "I'm not kissing anybody's ring. If Wayne's got a problem with me, he can say it to my face." But that wasn't the whole truth. Frank had spent 21 months being the guy John Wayne put in his place. Every party after Vegas, someone would bring it up. "Hey Frank, remember when the Duke shut down your suite?" Always with a laugh. Nobody understood. It wasn't funny to him. Every time someone told that story, Frank saw himself powerless, watching Wayne walk away like he was disciplining a child. Tonight was supposed to be professional, but sitting 3 chairs from John Wayne, watching him laugh about real actors and discipline, Frank felt something snap. The realization that if he didn't push back now, he'd spend the rest of his career being the guy who let John Wayne walk all over him twice. The conversation around them had died completely. Dessert plates sat untouched. A waiter saw Frank's face and pivoted back to the kitchen. In that silence, Frank said, "You've been making the same movie for 15 years, Duke. Don't lecture me about craft." John's hand came up, palm open, about to say something measured. But Frank leaned forward. "You know what they call you in the back lot? A walking prop. You stand where they tell you, say your lines, cash your check. That's not acting. That's carpentry." The words hung for half a second. Then Frank's hand moved to his glass. He didn't pick it up to drink. He picked it up and brought it down hard on the table. Hard enough that the stem separated from the base and the bowl split into 3 pieces. Not accidental. Deliberate. A punctuation mark. The sound Frank had been waiting 21 months to make. Because here's what that gesture meant. In Vegas, Wayne had walked into Frank's space and taken control. He'd knocked Tony down, cleared out Frank's guests, left Frank standing there with nothing to say. Tonight, Frank was taking something back. He was saying, with broken glass and 200 witnesses, "You don't get to walk over me twice." The sound cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. 200 people turned at once. The band stopped mid-song. Someone dropped a fork in the kitchen. John stood up. Not fast, not in rage, but in one smooth motion that made his chair scrape backward. He was 6'2", broad through the shoulders, and when he was angry, he seemed even bigger. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked down at Frank, and Frank looked up at him, and the space between them felt like it was shrinking. Some swear John's right hand went to his belt. Others say his hands stayed at his sides, loose but ready. What everyone agrees on is that Frank stayed seated, but his shoulders came up. His weight shifted forward, like he was about to stand and meet whatever was coming. Victor Chen was moving before anyone else, already halfway across the floor. 2 security men materialized from near the entrance, but they were still 10 feet away. And in those 3 or 4 seconds, John leaned down toward Frank, close enough that only table 7 could hear, and said something. Nobody's confirmed what those words were, but a waiter standing behind John's chair told his girlfriend that night he heard John say very clearly, "You want to find out if I'm just a prop? Stand up." Frank's hand went flat on the table, fingers spread wide, pressing down. His eyes never left John's face for what felt like a full minute but was probably 5 seconds. Nobody knew what would happen next. The entire ballroom was watching. Then Victor Chen's hand landed on John's shoulder. "Gentlemen, let's take this somewhere more private." It wasn't a suggestion. John straightened up. Frank leaned back. The moment broke like a held breath, releasing. They ended up in a conference room on the second floor. Victor shut the door, locked it, stood with his back against it. Nobody spoke for 30 seconds. John went to the window. Frank lit a cigarette. Victor spoke first. "You two are costing me a fortune. I've got 15 million riding on desert justice, and investors want to know why my leads can't sit through dinner without breaking furniture." "He broke the glass," John said, still facing the window, "after you implied he can't act." Victor held up both hands. "But I know what this is really about." Vegas, June '66. The Sands, half of Hollywood knows. Frank's been carrying that night for 21 months, and John, you walked away thinking it was handled clean. It was just waiting. The room went very quiet. John turned from the window slowly. Frank stared at Victor. "Here's what happened," Victor continued. "John, you did what you thought was right. You needed sleep. You asked 3 times. You finally took action. Professional. Done." He turned to Frank. "But you got shut down in front of your people, treated like a kid. And for 21 months, you've heard how John Wayne handled it with such class, such authority. Every time someone tells that story, they make you smaller and him bigger." Frank's jaw was tight. "He humiliated me. I stopped your party," John said, turning fully. "There's a difference. You walked into my space like you owned it, put your hands on my man, made my guests leave. Everyone talked about it for months. Duke, how you handled Sinatra. I became a fucking cautionary tale. You were playing music at 3 in the morning. I had a stunt at 9. I asked nice 3 times. What was I supposed to do? Talk to me, man to man. Not knock out my bodyguard and treat me like a child. Tony put his hand on me first. After you showed up like you were my father shutting down prom." Victor held up both hands. "Enough. You're both right. You're both wrong. More importantly, you're both missing the point. Listen to what he's saying. He's not asking them to like each other. He's asking them to pretend professionally for money. That's Hollywood." John walked to the conference table, pulled out a chair, sat heavily. Frank watched, then did the same. 6 feet apart, polished wood between them. Victor stayed by the door. "I show up," John said, looking at Frank directly. "I know my lines. I hit my marks. I don't waste time. Don't make excuses. That's not being a prop. That's being a professional. If that's not deep enough for you, I can't help you. But don't mistake reliability for lack of talent." Frank tapped Ash. "You can hit every mark perfect and still deliver something dead. The camera knows when you're feeling it and when you're just reciting. That's not drama. That's truth. And sometimes truth requires breaking the plan." They stared at each other. Victor's hand on the doorknob, ready to intervene, but something shifted. John's shoulders dropped slightly. Frank stubbed out his cigarette. Recognition. 2 men describing the same mountain from different sides. John leaned forward. "Vegas." Just the one word. Frank met his eyes. "Yeah, I needed sleep. You needed respect. We were both right about what we needed, both wrong about how we got it." Frank was quiet. "Then you could have waited until morning. I had a stunt at 9. I'm 60, Frank. 1 lung. I fall wrong. I don't get back up." Frank hadn't known that. His expression changed. "You should have told me. Would it have mattered?" "Yeah, Duke, it would have." Stop for a second. 2 of the biggest names in Hollywood, finally saying out loud what they should have said 21 months ago. This is what happens when ego gives way to honesty. "So here's what we do," Victor said. "You make the picture. You bring your methods, both of you. You don't have to be friends, but you will be civil, professional, and you will make me $15 million. Clear. John nodded once. Frank said, "Yeah, we're clear." "Good. Now shake hands. In 2 minutes, we're going downstairs for a photo. The story tomorrow is Hollywood's biggest stars team up. Not Wayne and Sinatra nearly brawl. Understood?" They stood at the same time. John extended his hand first. Frank took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds, firm but not aggressive. When they released, John said, "If we do this picture, I need to know you'll show up on time." Frank almost smiled. "If we do this, I need to know you'll take a risk once in a while." "Deal," John said. "Deal," Frank echoed. Then Frank added, quieter, "For what it's worth, Duke, I get it now. What you did in Vegas, you weren't trying to humiliate me. You were trying to survive." John's expression softened slightly. "And you weren't trying to disrespect me tonight. You were trying to get back what you felt you lost." Victor opened the door. "Let's go sell a movie." They went back downstairs 20 minutes after they'd left. The ballroom had recovered its buzz, though attention shifted when John and Frank reappeared. They walked in together, close enough that it looked intentional. Victor gestured toward the photographer waiting near the main table. The shot they took that night. John and Frank standing together, both in tuxedos, both managing something close to a genuine smile, ran in Variety the next morning with the headline "Western Legends Join Forces." But here's what the photo didn't show. When they were positioned next to each other, just before the flashbulbs went off, Frank said something under his breath. Only John heard it. "Next time you need sleep in Vegas, just call me first." John didn't respond out loud, but if you look at that photo carefully, really study his face, you can see the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, not quite relief. Somewhere in between. The picture they were supposed to make, Desert Justice, never actually happened. A month later, the financing fell through. The press release said scheduling conflicts, but the truth is simpler. By the time the money got sorted, both men had moved on. The moment had passed. But what didn't pass was the understanding they'd reached. 2 months later, Frank was performing at the Sands again. Different suite, ground floor. He sent a note to John's room around 10 p.m. party downstairs, keeping it quiet. "You're welcome if you want." John didn't go, but he sent a note back. "Appreciate it. Get some sleep eventually." Frank smiled when he read it. 3 years later, 1971, they ran into each other at another industry event. Frank was at the bar. John was leaving. They shook hands, exchanged a few words. Nothing dramatic, just two men who'd learned that sometimes the hardest fights are the ones you walk away from. Notice how the story ends not with fireworks, but with quiet resolution. That's real life. That's how these things actually get settled. Not with grand speeches, but with small gestures and mutual respect earned over time. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. Years later, someone asked John if he regretted how he'd handled Vegas. He thought, then said, "I regret that it had to happen, but I don't regret doing what I needed to do." When the same question was posed to Frank, he gave a different answer. "I regret the noise. I don't regret the music." 2 men, 2 perspectives. One night that changed how they saw each other, and eventually, how they saw themselves.